Okay, everyone, we are about ready for our final panel. Hey, Ben, we're ready for our final panel. I'm so excited about it. But before we do, we're going to see a short film. You are all aware that there is a concerted, very specific, and very intentional attack on the truth, on accurate discussions and history of race in this country. You are aware that a new narrative is being created about this moment. The narrative was introduced by the very phrase MAGA, right? That in and of itself is a kind of narrative hijacking. It is a way of suppressing the truth about our past to suggest that there was some mythical moment when America was perfect. And we also know that this has a historical analog. We also know that this is precisely what happened after Reconstruction, when the lost cause narrative was created to discredit Reconstruction, to tell a false story about the Civil War and the Confederacy. We talked about this a little bit earlier. And we know that it was actually quite effective, that in fact it was successful. And so we understand that the consequences of losing the narrative war are very, very serious indeed. We cannot ignore it or suggest to ourselves that that is not also a front on which we must work. For those of us who are lawyers, and civil rights lawyers in particular, we are keenly aware of this, even as we are most often ill-equipped to confront it. We understand that the story that gets told, the words that get created, Janae referred to reverse discrimination earlier. What an interesting phrase to even introduce into the lexicon, right? All of these words, look at how the initials DEI have been weaponized. The three softest, most anodyne words you can imagine: diversity, equity, and inclusion. Not one is an action item. It's all just like so soft and lovely, and somehow they have been weaponized into a slur meant to denigrate the qualifications of Black people. We understand the power of narrative. We understand the power of the story. And we also understand how often those who are part of our democratic infrastructure, or who should be, acquiesce to the hijacking of the narrative. We see it in the sane washing that happens in the media of statements that are absolutely absurd. We see that they want the narrative, or else you wouldn't want the Kennedy Center. You wouldn't want to show up at all the baseball games and to take over the World Cup. And you want to be part of all of these other places where we tell stories about who we are and where we connect with one another. And so we have to get serious about the narrative. Of course, the center of that is education. Are we going to be able to teach the truth to our children in universities, to one another? And that's going to be the subject of the next panel. One of my students will introduce the panel participants, but before he does, I want to first show you this brief story about a man, a scholar, Dr. Marvin Dunn, a professor in Florida, who took it upon himself after Florida passed its so-called Stop Woke Act to decide that he was going to teach the truth by any means necessary. So let's watch that film.
Well, across the country, the month of February is set aside to celebrate and learn about Black history. But in Florida, that will look very different this year.
Last year, the governor signed legislation that restricts certain race-based conversations in schools and businesses. One retired professor has vowed to keep teaching uncomfortable truths. Christian Benavidez has his story.
The first time I came out here.
For Dr. Marvin Dunn, the town of Rosewood is hallowed ground, the site of one of the worst race massacres in Florida history. In 1923, a white mob burned down a thriving Black community. Rosewood is one of the stops on Dunn's Teach the Truth tour. High school student Janiyah Spivey took the tour in January.
It kind of made me angry because These black people, they didn't deserve being killed.
Dunn, a retired professor at Florida International University, started the tours after Governor Ron DeSantis signed a law called the Individual Freedom Act, limiting what can be taught about race.
You're afraid that they're not being taught this in the classroom.
I know that they're not being taught this in the classroom. They're not being taught any kind of history, black history, that could possibly embarrass or make a white person feel guilty.
The law, referred to as the Stop Woke Act by its supporters, says an individual should not be made to feel guilt, anguish, or other forms of psychological distress based on past actions by members of the same race.
The state law has created confusion over what educators can say about race.
Florida's Education Department recently rejected an advanced placement African American Studies course, citing in part lessons on reparations, the Black Lives Matter movement, and Black gender and sexuality.
We want education, not indoctrination.
The law has also been cited in the removal of books, including Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, from school libraries in Pinellas County.
Right now, Florida is the least free state in the union, where they're trying to limit information available to children and to their parents.
Last fall, a federal judge paused the law's implementation in public colleges and universities. No matter the final outcome, Dunn says he will keep teaching the history he feels all Florida students should know. Cristian Benavides, CBS News, Miami.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeffrey Wooten. I am a 3L here at Howard University School of Law, and I am one of Sherrilyn Ifill's seminar students. Our final panel of the day, Winning the Narrative War This Time, Overcoming the New Lost Cause, Disinformation and the Suppression of Truth, examines the growing efforts to reshape how American history is told and what it means to resist that effort. This conversation will explore how educators, scholars, artists, and institutions are working to preserve truth, challenge disinformation, and ensure that a fuller and more honest history is told. Please join me, we will be joined by Deborah Menkart, co-director of the Zinn Education Project, Tiffany Brewer, assistant professor of law here at Howard University School of Law, Dr. Benjamin Talton, executive director of the Moorland-Spingarn Research Center, and Yolanda Wisher, senior curator at Monument Lab. The panel will be moderated by Sherrilyn Ifill. Please join me in welcoming our panelists.
Okay, we are in the home stretch, but we could not close out this symposium without having this conversation with these individuals, and I'm just incredibly excited that we can really zero in on this piece, which is so important. You've heard already the description of the panel, and I've talked about it a little bit, and I wanted to bring together these folks because I told them I wanted us to end on a hopeful note. I wanted us to end talking to people who are doing the work and who are envisioning how we can keep alive the truth, how we can transmit the truth, who are doing the important subversive work of ensuring that our historical records remain. And so I want to start at the far end with Deborah Menkart, who is the co-director of the Zinn Education Project. And for those of you who don't know the Zinn Education Project, you should. They do extraordinary work bringing together teachers and ensuring that teachers are taught and have the equipment, the curricular equipment they need to teach about our history, particularly to teach about our civil rights history, our history around struggle, racial struggle, gender struggle, and so forth. And their programs are just absolutely wonderful, and I've been privileged to participate in one, and I hope they'll invite me back for more. And so, Deborah, why don't you describe what you all are doing?
Thank you so much. And thank you, as the earlier panel said, for linking art, academics, K through 12 teachers who are often made invisible and yet are on the front lines of this work, as Dr. Dunn said. Really, I think, and excuse me if I read a little bit more than some of the other folks did, but teachers and librarians are really the primary facilitators of opportunities for young people to learn from history to shape a just future. So I really appreciate you including this perspective, and which is, of course, what the right wing, sadly, so well understands, and I think, as Dr. Sarah Lewis said, has long understood. You know, after the Stono Rebellion, what was the first form of repression? It was denying literacy. During Reconstruction, we saw thousands of schools being burned. You know, I think that the right fully understands the power of learning, because when young children learn from history, they're not gullible to the lies. They won't fall for them or the divide and conquer tactics. They can recognize them. They can see through them, so they'll have no power over them. And yet, despite the threats that we just saw in this video, we have hundreds of teachers sign up every week to access free People's History lessons at the Zinn Education Project that's coordinated by Rethinking Schools and Teaching for Change, in addition to the 170,000 that have already registered over the past 5 years, or 15 years, excuse me. And these teachers are not only working sort of to counter the executive orders, the laws, the chilling effects, having their names put literally on lists by the Daily Wire with their names in the cities where they live, getting phone calls at their work saying they should be fired. But it's also trying to do this work in a country that has long devalued and literally, this is the one time I'll use the word, literally whitewashed history. No Child Left Behind and high stakes testing have essentially silently censored history. National media and even progressive groups often give a fairy tale version of history. For example, I think many of us here in this room have quoted Dr. King saying, I have a dream, 4 words, I have a dream. We could use 7 words and quote him saying eternal hostility to poverty, racism, and militarism. Just 3 more words if we just wanted to limit it. And as upset as we are with MAGA administration's attempt to erase the history at the President's house in Philadelphia, children's books and textbooks have long laid the path. And I have a children's book here from Scholastic. How many people remember the Scholastic Book Fair? Okay, so we're not talking about a small publisher, right? So this was a number of years ago. They published this book about Hercules, who, as we know, was enslaved to George Washington. Look at them, arm in arm, buddy buddy. So this is the path that has been laid and that teachers are trying to undo in their work. And the good news is, so now the rest of this will be the good news. The good news is that teachers are really dedicating to teaching people's history. You know, again, this is a long legacy of this work. And not just from the big cities and the blue states. So I just pulled from our sign-up list from the last couple of weeks, from the more than 520 teachers that signed up in the last few weeks. Here's some of the locations: Morrisville, North Carolina; Kingman, Arizona; Robertsdale, Alabama; Greeley, Colorado; Rincon, Puerto Rico; Fayetteville, Arkansas; East Lansing, Michigan; Black Hawk, Colorado. Many times I just want to pull out a map and find where all these places are. And now let's look at some of the lessons they were looking for to download. They signed up to access lessons on COINTELPRO, Reconstruction, SNCC, resistance to enslavement, the Vietnam War, McCarthyism, and the Constitution. Obviously looking for lessons that could help kids make sense of life today. In the 2020 White House Conference on American History, which, remember, was held shortly after the uprising, after the murder of George Floyd, so intentionally held to use history to undo the uprising, one of the lead speakers said that the Zinn education materials are snuck under the doors of unsuspecting teachers. That would make our very small team very busy. And also dismisses the agency of the teachers who seek out and use these lessons and contribute their own. And it's not just people's history content that teachers are signing up for, but also pedagogy. Our lessons that they use and adapt help students step into history so that they realize it's actually a set of choices, as some of our earlier speakers have said. It's not inevitable, We could have made different choices in the past and can in the future. And it also is about issues of power, race, class, gender, and more. And then now if we could get the slides here, someone could put them up. Let's hope I can see them. Yeah, there we go. And let's see if it works to advance it. Yeah, there we go. So for example, with our lesson on the US-Mexico War, instead of just US versus Mexico, which is usually the narrative, they hear voices on both sides who had different perspectives, like Frederick Douglass, who wrote forcefully against the war, or the San Patricio Brigade, Irish-American soldiers, like the Polish-Americans we heard about earlier, who realized they were fighting on the wrong side. And in our lessons on the Vietnam War, we highlight the soldiers, the veterans of the war, who played an active role in the anti-war movement. But that's not usually the story we hear in textbooks, and yet it's a story that young people who are facing being drafted today need to hear. Our lessons on Columbus, because we're here with a group of lawyers, is in the form of a trial to determine who's responsible for the genocide of the Taino. So Columbus is a defendant, his men, king of Queen in Spain, for financing the invasion, but also the system of empire, so that young people see that systems play a role. It's not just, let's get rid of this one individual or another individual. And so students, we often hear that they leave the classroom and they go into the next one or the cafeteria and people think they're having a fight, but they're actually still debating who was responsible. And more importantly, the next issue that comes up in the curriculum or current event, young people themselves ask the question, so what system is making this possible? What's the systemic background rather than just focusing on the individual? Teaching about the Constitution is mandated in all federally funded schools. Of course, that won't be very many moving forward, but this rate. But on Constitution Day, you're supposed to teach about the Constitution. So typically it's presented as a sacred text, and students are invited to learn about the Founding Fathers, limited number of Founding Fathers, and even imagine which one they might have been. So last year, we invited teachers to sign up to teach truthfully about the Constitution. This is part of our Teach Truth campaign that we host with the National Education Association and 80 other organizations. And we offered 10 things that should be known about the Constitution, including, of course, the Reconstruction Amendments, which can be done as a gallery walk in classrooms. It can be done in public events. You could do it in community centers, at rallies. And our goal is for students to not only learn what's in the Constitution, but also to imagine what's possible and learn how the amendments and other advances in equity have been achieved. So one of the lessons offers a list of rights, and students are supposed to check off how many they think are in the US Constitution. So it has things like freedom of speech, right to free public education, right to health care, right to housing, et cetera. And a middle school teacher in Nagy, Minnesota, and her students said her students were confident they had aced the test. They said, these rights are just no-brainers. And when it turned out that they'd failed the test, they were shocked and also motivated to say, well, why don't we have these rights? And the lesson includes a list of the countries where those rights are part of the Constitution. So they see that actually that is, again, a choice. It is possible. Oopsie daisy, let's see if we go there. Yeah, I think, let's see if we go to, my glasses on. So, oh yeah, what right should be added? So then she had them say, if you were to pick one right, which one would you add? And they put them on Post-it. And she said that the most common themes were food and housing. One student said, other rights are useless if I'm dying of hunger. And here's a comment from a high school teacher in DC that he said one of his students said that my main takeaways are that the United States still has a lot of work to do as a nation, and we need to play an active role in making sure our government upholds our rights. And so again, the narrative is that we're indoctrinating children. Really, of course, what the right is concerned about is that we're motivating them and encouraging them to see what's possible. And then a wonderful teacher, Dr. Shalina Warren, who teaches at Dunbar, formerly the M Street School, had these, you could read the comments there that she made about teaching about the Constitution and what a contradiction that is in DC. And then she went on to make this comment here. We also have a lesson, we have a lesson on founding documents that students don't learn about. A lot of the founding documents from people who the speakers here have named that young people should learn about. I'm gonna, just to make sure I'm not going over time, go through these quickly, but you can see that teachers find that students get really engaged in reading these documents and getting a fuller picture of US history. And we have a lesson that involves the really excellent documentary called Necessity that looks at Native groups and others who've used the necessity defense, particularly to protect the climate, and young people then learn the importance of that. And we have a lesson that was done in collaboration with Richard Rothstein, looking at redlining. And for many young people, they either blame their family or credit their family for where they live and their housing. And after doing this lesson, come to realize again that the system has played a major role in that. And we have a number of lessons on SNCC. One of the lessons invites students to actually ponder many of the decisions that SNCC folks had to make at the time, so that they come to realize that organizing isn't just a protest or a speech, but it's actually making decisions about how you organize and debating. And sometimes if you're going to make a good decision, conferring with elders, learning from history, having long meetings and discussions. And we were lucky to have a couple of SNCC veterans consult on that lesson. One of them is here. I just want to note Judy Richardson, if you'd like to stand up. Stand up. Judy's in that photo looking at you all, staring out. And Judy was not only active in SNCC for many years, but also ran the Drum and Spear, one of the people who ran the Drum and Spear bookstore here in DC, and then went on to make a number of documentaries. One, how many people here have watched Eyes on the Prize? And Judy will want to know if you've watched all 14 hours. We also host monthly classes for educators with historians, and that is what Professor Ifill was referencing. And yes, we'll love to schedule you again. That would be wonderful. And because it's difficult for anybody to teach any topic if you're not able to keep up with the current scholarship. And state standards and curriculum are of little help with that, and anybody who's been to a school PD knows that the PD is usually also of little help. It's more about the rules you're supposed to follow and more tasks you're supposed to do. And in fact, a study we did of state standards on Reconstruction found that instead of reflecting the scholarship of W.E.B. Du Bois and dozens of contemporary scholars, many who are connected to the 14th Amendment Center, like Martha Jones and Kate Macer, the standards read more like the Dunning School narrative. Just a quick thought, if you want to talk to the person next to you, what did you learn about Reconstruction in school? What words did you hear? What? Carpetbaggers, scallywags, yeah. And that is sadly still the curriculum. We do have some copies of a report we did. There were some out on the table. We're happy to get you more. And thankfully, as a result of doing that report, and also Dr. Carr, who's here, is one of our really wonderful advisors. Yes, Dr. Gregory Carr. Thank you. Yeah, the traditional narrative that is really prevalent in most schools and the standards focuses on the federal governments as the only actors, leaving out one of the most extraordinary people's movements for democracy in this country's history. But after releasing our report, teachers and administrators used it to demand changes in their standards, scope, and sequence, and many made changes in the classroom. And so in our classes, they're participatory. Everybody here is welcome to join us. So for example, after our class with Kelly Carter Jackson, the author of the book We Refuse, teachers added more stories of resistance to their curriculum. Here's one example from a slide that one teacher produced, asking young people to imagine a question she poses in the book, and that is, how do you define revolution? And what counts as revolutionary? Does the American Revolution even count as revolutionary? And I was really glad to hear the speaker you had earlier on Haiti. Jean Theo Harris has presented a number of times about the civil rights movement. Her absolutely wonderful book, Professor Ifill's favorite book, right? One of her favorite books. It's out there. Yeah, and then her Jean Theo Harris is one of her newer books, The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks. We were able to send copies to schools all over the country, including, I think you're seeing a classroom in Florida. So I do want to note that there are teachers, I think wherever there's repression, we know there's resistance. The laws banning teaching truthfully in Florida are because many teachers are and have always been. We can go back to Harriet Moore in late 1940s, 1950s. You can read a description of her, I think at the Civil Rights Movement Veterans website. She used to have one student stand guard by the window to make sure if the superintendent was coming, and meanwhile, she would be teaching. Langston Hughes, she would be teaching, W.E. Du Bois, and the child would let her know if she needed to put that box back under the table. And I think there's been a tradition of fugitive pedagogy ever since, and that, and then after a class, and I'm just closing up here, after a class with Dr. Clint Smith on the YA edition of his book, How the Word is Passed, students in Louisville, Kentucky were tasked with looking for echoes of slavery in their own city. And the teacher said the students were sad and angry to learn how that history had been all around them all that time. And in fact, one young girl went to a site where she had gone with her family for like recreation and taken a picture of herself. She went back to take a picture there again, now knowing a deeper understanding of the history. So it's young people are hungry to learn the truth, hungry for justice. If you've been around any child, particularly a little one, their two favorite statements are why, and that's not fair. Anybody's, and that stays with them. We also have, thanks to donations, Matt Delmont's book, Half American, about African Americans during World War II, we were able to send to schools. And here's a teacher in Texas. Her students created posters to share what they'd learned without the entire school. This is a teacher who's been teaching for 40 years in Texas. Another teacher took pages from the book, and the students made what are called blackout poems. So sharing these stories lets teachers know that they're not alone and that they are part of generations-long tradition of fugitive pedagogy. And just to close, I'll say again that as the right accuses us of doctrination, really the textbook version of history is the indoctrination. And what they're really afraid of is young people learning to see themselves as agents of history, and also to act in solidarity, to realize that we're stronger when we work together. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Deborah. That's great. Yolanda, I'm going to ask you to talk about the work of Monument Lab. I mean, I think many of us remember, it wasn't that long ago, that we had a very active engagement with the issue of Confederate monuments in this country. 2018 to 2021 or so. Monuments that had been all around us, they were like air. We tended not even to notice them, but there they were above us, steel and bronze and concrete up on giant pliths, demonstrating the exaltation of these figures. And many of them were figures of Confederate generals and others who were traitors to the Union, others who were unrepentant slave owners. And as we were engaging around these issues of police violence, young people began to confront these monuments that were in our midst. The Charlottesville March, the Unite the Right rally was around the effort of right-wing fascists to protect a Confederate monument. And it raised the whole issue for us of monuments themselves. Carrie Mae Weems likes to ask the question, who gets to decide? Who gets to decide what we exalt in the public space? And this is all part of storytelling, right? You are telling a story by what you exalt in the public space, what you allow to become part of the central vision of anyone in the public space. Many of these monuments, to my own interest, were located on the lawns of courthouses across the country, which also happens to be the places where many people were lynched in this country. And so the courthouse lawn is always fraught with lots of history, but Confederate monuments very often are in these locations where there is supposed to be justice. And I think it was quite deliberate. Of course, we also know that the whole Confederate monument movement was part of the lost cause narrative. These were not monuments that were created in the immediate decade or 2 or 3 after the end of the Civil War, but they were created in the 20th century, in the early 20th century, when the lost cause narrative was being advanced. So we had a very deliberate hijacking of the public landscape in order to tell a story about the Civil War, the Confederacy, and slavery. And Monument Lab has been doing extraordinary work, really mediating the set of conversations around monuments, what they are supposed to mean, who gets to decide, what does a monument have to look like? I'm a big believer in, monuments don't have to be steel and concrete. Who told us that? And so when we talk about on the other side, we have the opportunity to reimagine what is a monument. And so, Yolanda, you are a co-curator at Monument Lab. I know Paul Farber well, and I love the work you all do. And can you share with us the extraordinary work you're doing?
Well, thank you for having me here today. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you all for being here. My name's Yolanda Wisher. I'm the senior curator at Monument Lab. I'm also a poet, educator, and musician. And Monument Lab is a public art and history studio based in Philadelphia. And I'll start my slides too. We work at the intersection of art, memory, and justice alongside artists, students, and educators, activists, and civic partners to ask a deceptively simple question: who gets remembered, how, and why? In this moment, shaped by disinformation, a resurgent new lost cause, and the suppression of truth, that question carries real urgency. It is structural, it is profoundly public. Because monuments do more than mark the past, they actively shape the present. They are storytellers in the landscape that guide what we see, what we value, and what we carry forward. Monument Lab began almost a decade ago as a classroom project. Since then, the work has grown around a core belief. Monuments remain open, they evolve, they invite engagement. We often describe our approach as unfreezing monuments, loosening the hold of singular narratives and making space for fuller, more honest histories. We begin with questions, because questions, especially the ones without easy answers, create pathways for accountability, participation, and shared imagination. One of our major efforts to understand the stories monuments tell is the National Monument Audit. Through tens of thousands of public conversations and a data set of nearly 50,000 monuments, we came to define monuments broadly as statements of power and presence. That includes statues and also protest, poetry, and projection, forms that insist on being seen and heard. What we found reveals a pattern many people recognize and still demands deeper reckoning. Nothing about this should be new to you. The commemorative landscape of the United States centers whiteness, maleness, and wealth. 88% of the most monumented individuals are white men. Many came from inherited wealth. Many owned land, and many owned other people. War and conquest dominate what is remembered. Even within Civil War monuments, only about 1% reference slavery. What emerges is a partial story presented with the weight of completeness. This is where the narrative war is already underway. Disinformation often works through what feels familiar, through stories repeated so often they appear settled. Monuments can carry that repetition at the scale of infrastructure. They reinforce myths. They make absence feel ordinary. So the work ahead goes beyond correcting facts. It calls for transforming the conditions that shape how truth is seen, felt, and shared. At Monument Lab, we approach this through both critique and creation. We build what we call prototypes, because every monument can be understood as an evolving draft of public memory, a proposition, an invitation. One example of this work lives at Declaration House in Philadelphia, the site where Thomas Jefferson drafted the Declaration of Independence, a block away from the Liberty Bell and Independence Hall. It is often framed as a birthplace of freedom. A closer look brings another story into view. Robert Hemings, a 14-year-old enslaved boy, lived and worked in that house. He witnessed the writing of words about equality while living without it. So we ask, what shifts when Hemings stands at the center of that story? Working with artist Sonia Clark and a coalition of partners, we created the Descendants of Monticello. Because no known images of Hemings exist, Clark collaborated with descendants of the more than 400 people enslaved at Monticello. The installation features video portraits of their eyes, blinking, present, installed in the windows of the house. The house became animated. It met the gaze of the public. It looked back. Visitors were invited to respond to a central question. What does the Declaration of Independence mean to you today? This project represents a shift from monument as static object to monument as living process, from authority to inquiry, from erasure toward encounter. We see this transformation unfolding across the country, including in the exhibition Monuments, on view until May 3rd in Los Angeles, co-organized and co-presented by MoCA and The Brick. It features a selection of decommissioned monuments, many of which are Confederate, alongside contemporary artworks. One of those artworks is our film, An American Reflection, a single-channel digital work powered by data cloud visualizations. And if anyone is interested in seeing this film or sharing it in their classroom, you can reach out to us and we will share that with you. Each dot represents a conventional monument contained within the audit. The film reveals this country's monuments as an interconnected system of public symbols, one that disproportionately elevates the lost cause above emancipation and civil rights. So if we are serious about winning the narrative war, this kind of clarity matters. This work reaches beyond countering falsehoods. It calls for building infrastructures of truth. It means investing in public memory as a shared participatory practice. It means supporting artists, educators, and communities engaged in the slow relational work of reshaping how history lives among us. As we approach the 250th anniversary of this nation, we continue to live within a profound contradiction. The Declaration of Independence has inspired movements for freedom around the world, and it was written by a man who enslaved others. That contradiction is not a footnote, it is foundational. So the question becomes, how do we live with it responsibly? How do we tell it fully? How do we create conditions where more people can see themselves clearly and truthfully in the story of this nation? At Monument Lab, we believe that fuller histories open pathways to repair. Bringing forward what has been hidden interrupts cycles of harm. Engaging the past with honesty expands what becomes possible in the future. So in this narrative war, the goal extends beyond replacing one story with another. It is about expanding the field of storytelling itself, making room for complexity, inviting participation, ensuring that public memory belongs to all of us. And I'll close with this. Monuments shape more than memory. They shape identity, belonging, and collective direction. When we unfreeze them, when we question, remake, and gather around them differently, they can become sites of truth-telling, connection, and transformation. Thank you.
That was fabulous. Thank you, Yolanda. Appreciate it. Dr. Talton, you are a treasure, and you steward treasures. Dr. Talton is the director of the Moorland-Spingarn Center, which houses, I don't know how we would describe that collection. What do we describe it? Everything. I mean, it is one of the most important collections of Black history in this country. And it is a treasure that many of us kind of don't know resides on this campus. And the work that he's been doing to expand the reach of the collection, to build a museum for the collection, to ensure that the collection has the funding it deserves, is the kind of institution making that we were talking about earlier that is so important. And so, Dr. Talton, please tell us about what you've been doing.
Thank you, Professor Sherrilyn Ifill. I'm teasing her because she's calling me Dr. Talton. She says it so nicely, but I've never heard her call me Dr. Talton before. So I will enjoy this moment, because it's only going to be a moment, because I'm always just been.
What you don't know is that Dr. Talton is the husband of Janae Nelson, who you heard earlier, who argued the Louisiana versus Calais case.
See, now you just put pressure on me.
A power couple in our midst.
You just put a lot of pressure on me, and she's videoing, of course. I told you about my museum vision? I told you about that? Oh, wow, okay. No, that's great. Okay. Whisper campaign, put it out there. Well, thank you, Professor Sherrilyn Ifill, for inviting me. It's truly an honor, and I'm honored that you thought of me to be a part of this conversation. It truly means a lot, obviously. You know, I've admired you for decades, and to my esteemed colleagues on this panel. You wanted us to end with optimism, I believe, but I'm gonna try to work there. I'll try to work there. Yeah, but I like the conversation around narrative and monuments. It fits well. And I want to touch on these points of what we're doing at Moorland-Spingarn, what it is, because as you say, you know, if you quiz 99% of the students and faculty on Howard's campus, they would know that it's there. And you can't write a history book on anything in Black America without going accurately if you don't go to Moorland-Spingarn research. That's not an exaggeration at all. And so the fact that it's not more well known, it means that our history has not been well written. I'll put it like that. So I'll talk a little bit about what we do at Moorland-Spingarn. I'm a historian, I'm not an archivist or a librarian, I just have the honor of serving as the executive director. And then I'll talk about the journey that got me there, and then think about what we want to do what we're doing now, what we want to do moving forward. But just briefly, I was inspired by the previous remarks to think about this narrative and monuments, but also think about we're trying to shift them and the importance of monuments for them, but also the fact that most of us in this country consume the same media. It's not like there's progressive media and Black media just for those people, and you know, we're consuming things that are harmful to us. Our children are consuming information that's harmful to us, and unfortunately, as an educator, and I've been at Hofstra, at Temple, and now at Howard University, we believe a lot of the negative stories about us. I used to ask when I was at Temple, I taught at Temple for 13 years. This is not what you asked me to talk about, but I'm gonna do it real quick. Temple, if you know North Philly, it's a economically oppressed space, and Temple sits right in it. And you look across the street and you see abandoned buildings. You see blocks that have 1 or 2 dwellings on them. That's at least Temple when during my time there. I'd always ask the students, white and Black, why does this neighborhood look like this? Why do these houses look? And it's a shame because these white Temple students are renting houses in the neighborhood, and this is their first exposure to Black America, right? And it's deprivation, and it's violence, mental health issues. and the results of the Black Flight of the 1970s and 80s, 9 times out of 10, they'll say that Black people make poor economic choices. And when you raise the book Color of Law, they'd never heard of, these are Black folks, Black students, never heard of redlining, never heard of blockbusting, never heard of contract lending. And they believe that, yeah, these people live in these conditions because they prioritize other things than taking care of their finances in their houses. And that's not their fault. We need, as educators, need to do, as you're doing, need to do a better job of educating the parents and also educating the students on that. Along those lines, this morning, anyone been on Howard's main campus on a spring Friday? If you want to change a narrative and challenge a stereotype, just go to Howard's campus anytime. I always say that Howard University, any HBCU, is where all the stereotypes about us are blatant lies. And if you walk around campus on a Friday, you see the queues are out there, so of course the Kappas had to be out there. Students are crammed into undergraduate libraries studying. People are rushing to class. Students are painting pictures of the buildings on campus. And then these high schoolers are walking around consuming this, shocked, right? Because they've never seen anything like this. And I always ask them, where are the police officers? They're nowhere around. We don't have to have them around. And it's the inverse of what they say about us. And to make it even more, and I give a great Howard University tour. If you want to come to main campus, I give an awesome tour. What I always point out, and we're walking these lanes that giants have walked. And so we talk about Frederick Douglass being the most photographed person of the 19th century. He was also the longest serving member of the Howard University Board of Trustees, 26 years. And we have a building named after him, Frederick Douglass Memorial Hall, right in the center of the yard. Right? So it's not just about a predominantly Black university, it's about a Black university that honors that. And it's a fact that that building was designed by Albert Cecil, an African-American architect, as was the chemistry building, as was Founders, where the law school sat on the 3rd floor, where Thurgood Marshall designed his Brown v. Board case. So you're walking around all this history, and I can go on and on and on. Paul, we talked about SNCC in Greensboro, trying to desegregate the lunch counters. That was 1966. 1943, Pauli Murray, a student of what school? Howard University School of Law. She was mentoring Howard University undergraduates, mostly women, who were frustrated that they couldn't eat at lunch counters on U Street. Y'all know the story. I'm talking to the wrong crowd, right? So she helped organize these students to desegregate the lunch counters on U Street. This was in 1943. So we're going 20 plus years before Greensboro, North Carolina, which we do honor. But I always tell these students that visit, and our Howard University students, we talk about narrative. Howard University, our institutions that need to be better supported, are part of countering that narrative. And an important part of that, obviously, is the Moorland-Spingarn Research Center. And I was there today, and a colleague of mine was there with 2 young men, a father and a son. He said they were former members of the Gangster Disciples from Wisconsin. He said, they're not going to college, but I just wanted them to see a space that was about Black people, about uplift, about education, about undermining the lies about us. So it wasn't like he was giving them a tour so they could apply this year, but he was interested in countering that narrative. So the Moorland-Spingarn Research Center, has anyone done research at Moorland? See?
Interlibrary, our libraries get it for us.
Oh, interlibrary. Well, you can't get it from us. You can get it from Founders, but we're non-circulating library. That's stolen. They stole stuff from us. They stole that. So very quickly, just tell you who we are, how I got there, because we're non-circulating. So the Moorland-Spingarn Research Center, founded in 1914, we became a center in 1973, so we're 50 and 110. Kelly Miller was the dean of the School of Arts and Sciences. He was frustrated because, again, Howard University was founded to educate Black people, but not to educate Black people about Black people. So our curriculum was the classics. You're learning everything about Greek, Latin, Roman Empire, British Empire, mathematics, sciences, and all that. So Kelly Miller, and I'll make this the short part because we'll speed up. Anytime someone says I'm going to be brief, buckle up because they're going to take a long time. But Kelly Miller was the highest ranking African American at Howard University at the time because we had white presidents until 1926. And so he decided to start collecting books, statues, ephemera, artifacts on the global Black experience. And we see that global is important. Now, sometimes you might say global Black is redundant because Black is necessarily global, but I added on there just to make sure that we know we're not just talking about Black Americans, never have been. So Kelly Miller's collecting these in 1914, we become the Africana Library. Jesse Moorland, who was a YMCA, donates his materials, becomes the Moorland Library. And then Arthur Spingarn, president of NAACP in 1940s, donates his collection. It becomes the Moorland-Spingarn collection. Now, that we become a center in 1973, we're talking about the power of protest. Howard is not a utopia at all. I worked there, I know. It's not a utopia. Much of how it is today is because of student protests. It's more than just shaping narrative. Sometimes you have to protest. Howard University students protested continuously to make Howard a Black university. Some would argue that's still not a Black university. But one of those protests in '68, they protesting around the world. Their protest led to the creation of African American Studies, African American Resource Center, Jazz Studies, because they were saying our curriculum still in 1968 isn't Black. Also made Moorland-Spingarn a research center. So we are the university's archive. We're unique in universities that the university archives is part of a larger center. So we have all the papers from the Board of Trustees, presidents, sports teams, all the presidents, on and on and on and on. We're also an individual and organizational archive. So we have the papers of organizations such as Black Caucus, Trans-Africa, Jack and Jill of DC, Roller Skating Club, Alpha Kappa Alpha. It's important that we are privately Black owned and operated because we know what's important for Black history. Right? We can make decisions. Like if you don't know Black folks, you don't know that roller skating clubs are important. And that history is important. You can't tell the story of Black urban America without talking about roller skating. Jack and Jill. We know the importance of Jack and Jill. So we have also the papers of David Dinkins, Mary Frances Berry, Mary Baraka, Kwame Nkrumah, on and on and on. In that section alone, 800 collections. And then we're a non-circulating library on the Black experience. Every language that Black folks speak, we have books by and about them. They're non-circulating. You have to come to Moorland to get the books. We're also the Black Press Archive. So we have the largest collection of newspapers from around the world. If you go on, I wanted to bring the slides today, I just wasn't organized enough, but you can just online search Digital Howard, and you'll see some of the items that we've digitized. And a lot of that is the Black Press Archive, going back to 1827. We're a year and a half away from the 200th anniversary of the Black Press. We have digitized almost all of Freedman's Journal, including the first one from 1827. We have the North Star from the first issue all the way up. So all the big papers, many of which you can get on ProQuest. But what's important to me is that we have the small town, small city newspapers. Because then they tell the stories that the mainstream press is not going to tell about these towns. It's also important we can see the ads, and we can also see the events. So you can see from late 1800s to the present how sartorial choices have changed, hairstyles have changed, the ways in which we gather has changed. And that's one of the many, many things, many reasons why the Black press is important. We're also the Howard University Museum. And that museum is up some steps, around a corner, down a hall, and through a bathroom, knock on the door 2 times, and you'll find the Howard University Museum. That's why, as Sherrilyn was saying, my goal is to build Howard University, if it is truly Research One, would have a proper Research One museum. That's not just dedicated to Howard history, but have exhibit space for artists. Right now, we have a phenomenal exhibit on Gordon Parks. Howard has the largest collection of Gordon Parks photographs anywhere in the world outside of the Gordon Parks Foundation. Every 3 years, we'll have a different iteration of his collection. So one of my dreams is to, if I can, rally the troops, rally the alums, rally supporters, so we can have a proper museum on Georgia Avenue that also respects the communities. Now, respectfully, Howard University is helping to gentrify Shaw and LaDroit Park with its real estate deals. I say if we're going to spur gentrification in Northwest DC, we need to give back and make sure these communities and their histories and their cultures are respected. And we want to do that through the Howard University Museum. Now, how did I get there? I am a Howard alum, and I just used the reading room as a student. And when I was a student there in 1992 to 1996, It was packed. The reading room was packed. If you go into Founders Library, our reading room is there. We're within the library, but we're separate administratively from the library. And the reading room was our main public-facing space. And so I spent a lot of time then. I fell in love with archives through Moorland-Spingarn. You sit there and you can order Frederick Douglass's papers, handwritten notes that he wrote. We have Frederick Douglass images. We have speeches of Martin Luther King. We have Martin Luther King some stuff, but Kwame Nkrumah, first president of Ghana, with Marginelli, you can see where he corrected in his own handwriting his speeches. Mordecai Wyatt Johnson, our first president, Howard Thurman, Benjamin Mays, iconic president of Morehouse. We can go and order his papers, and I can sit with them, literally sitting with the ancestors. So what did that do for an 18-year-old? You know, I was on a podcast a few months ago, Black Studies podcast, asking me about my role as a scholar and as someone who runs an archive. And the interviewer was shocked when I said, I love archives. Because the narrative is that archives are violence. That's where the stories of Black people being enslaved and being whipped and being sold, that's where they're housed. It's colonial, or they're being conquered. So we have to read against the archival grain to get the real story. But that's not my introduction to archives. I love archives. They make me feel good. Every time I go into Moorland-Spingarn, or go to Schomburg, go to Avery, I get excited because, again, I can sit with the ancestors. So I was at Temple University minding my own business in 2022, and I learned that there was a crisis at Moorland-Spingarn. And I can shout out my brother Greg Carr in the back, and our sister Dana Williams, who in 2018 held a conference because Moorland-Spingarn was going to close. Can you imagine the largest privately owned repository on the global Black experience in the world? Respect to Schomburg, they're public, we're private, and we're University Archives. That's our sister institution. But they were going to close Moorland-Spingarn for lack of funding, for lack of people going there, for lack of knowledge about it. And if it weren't for Brother Greg and Sister Dana, it would have gone quietly to a death. Can you imagine if the football team was going to close down on Howard University's campus? Can you imagine if they said, we're just not going to have band? No more basketball. They'd be meetings, and the alums would be calling, and there'd be fundraising. Moorland-Spingarn Research Center, the Center for the Study of the Global Black Experience, was going to close. And it was going to, no death rattle, just silence. So shout out Brother Greg and Sister Dana. They held a conference. They wrote studies to show the university and therefore the broader community the significance of these collections and how they relate to everything, not just history and African American and African studies, but math and psychology and sociology and art, particularly art, and the bands, right? And so through that, the university's consciousness was raised and they woke up. And then thank goodness Nicole Hannah-Jones was hired at Howard because she discovered the Black Press Archive. And then they had a crisis. They didn't have a leader for Moorland-Spingarn, and then somehow they offered me the job. So that's how I got there. And when I arrived in the room, January 2022, there were 5 people in that room, five employees, 5 staff members. At its peak in the 1980s, it had 50. Published its own books, published its own reports. Every unit, all those divisions had an assistant. When I walked in, there were 5. The university, Moorland hadn't had a librarian. The largest non-circulating library in the Black experience didn't have a librarian in 20 years. What was I thinking? But the good thing is that the university had my back. Dr. Frederick had faith in me, Dr. Wutall, the provost. Fortunately, I was assigned to be in the provost's office as opposed to being in the university libraries. We were able to raise some funds. Nicole Hannah-Jones directed us to some people. And so now we have 23 people on staff in the last 4 years. Speaking of optimism, we have a 20-student internship program we call the MSRC Scholars. They work as part of staff. So it's frustrating in some ways that we have half of our staff are students, basically. They're not full-time employees, they're part-time, but they get the training. They get this knowledge of narrative. They get the knowledge of archival best practices, and they also get paid. The other challenge, though, is that half of my staff is paid on grants. And so that's terrifying. Look at the look that you see on my face right now is terror. Most of these people are under the age of 35, and they're wondering if they're gonna have a job in December because a lot of our grants are gonna run out. So my job is to keep the lights on in Moorland and in their house. And so As I raise money for this museum, I'm also raising money to keep my staff. Another part of this, and I'll close with this so we could have the conversation, is digitization is preservation. And digitization is also equitable access. I don't think it's right if you're in Accra, Ghana, that you have to purchase a plane ticket and get a hotel in DC to study the papers of your first president. I don't think it's right that if you're in California, you have to raise money as a graduate student in 2026. Now, back in the 80s, that was part of it. But to get on a plane in California, raise money, you have to come to Moorland-Spingarn and do research. So if you go to Digital Howard, you'll see some of the digitization we've been doing, and we want to do more. That takes money. Now, that gets us also into an AI conversation. So digitization is not just equitable access. It also means that as they scrub the internet of all the white data, they're coming for the black data. And as we digitize, they want that data, and they want it for free. And they want us to do things that are not necessarily in our best interest. But at the same time, I can leverage that to raise money. I don't want to be part of the problem, I want to be part of the solution, but I'm also, hungry people have to make choices. And that's just the reality. So we're working with computer science to make our own large language models that center the black experience, trying to be ethical in terms of who we go out to fundraise from and with, but quite honestly, it is a challenge. It is a challenge. And what that means for the next couple of years, I'm not sure, but we have to be part of that conversation.
Ben, you didn't talk about the art collection. Do you have?
So we do have an art collection, yes, we do have an art collection, but that's our challenge. We don't have proper storage space. We don't have a storage space for it. What we've done is we've partnered with the Gallery of Art. We have a large museum collection, including Paul Robeson's robes from Othello. We have Louis Mailou Jones' work. We have a priceless art collection. Combine that with the Gallery of Art, which sits in the College of Fine Arts. We probably have the largest collection of black art at any university, maybe outside of Yale, maybe outside of the Beinecke. And our goal is to combine our two collections and make that the Howard University when we raise the money to put the museum on Georgia Avenue.
See the vision now? You see the vision? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it. I love it. Thank you, Ben. And we're going to wrap up with one of our own, Professor Tiffany Brewer, because as Tiffany said to me, we can't leave the lawyers out because we can't let them off the hook. That lawyers are also responsible for narrative. And, you know, she and I were talking, I was talking about why I love and why I deem it so important for us to be able to do actual trials in litigation, because trials give the opportunity for our clients to speak. They give the opportunity for judges to create, for lawyers to create a record, for judges to make factual findings that become the truth merely by the fact that a judge found it. And that is a way of us building stories and preserving history and giving legitimacy to the stories of our people as well. And so I wanted Tiffany Brewer to talk a little bit. She is, are you chair this year, incoming or outgoing?
Well, I'm right
You're
now.
right now. She is the chair of the ABA section on litigation, and I'm going to be speaking at her conference shortly, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so Tiffany.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me today. And yes, as the chair of the largest organization of litigators in the world, I thought that it was important for us to remember that lawyers cannot be let off the hook. And in being inspired today and reflecting on what to present, I thought about being a professor of Black women in the law here. A Black woman who was a lawyer who in 1974 found herself presiding at the Watergate hearings, and that's Congresswoman Barbara Jordan. And she began her remarks with a simple but profound invocation. And she said, "We the people." She reminded the nation that the Constitution begins with power, but not just power only, with collective responsibility. She also told the truth because she reminded everyone that when the Constitution was completed in 1787, that she was not included in we the people. Still, despite that exclusion, that day she declared, in thinking about her responsibility and her role and her approach, that her faith was in the Constitution, and that her faith was whole, it was complete, and it was total. And then she said something that echoes across generations and is relevant for us today in the voice that only Congresswoman Barbara Jordan could say. She said, "I am an inquisitor." And today I want to suggest in this moment, in this era of disinformation, historical revision, narrative distortion, that litigators must understand themselves in the same way, not simply as advocates, but as inquisitors of truth. So what we are witnessing now in illegal and unconstitutional executive orders must be countered and not ignored. Lawyers can't be silent. Lawyers and litigators must play a role as inquisitors of truth. So I'm also a preacher, so I'm going to need you to tell your neighbor, I am an inquisitor. I am an inquisitor. We are faced with similar constitutional crises in that the executive orders that are referenced for today's panel have been issued in direct contradiction of the hard-fought protections of the 14th Amendment. We're witnessing coordinated efforts now at the federal level to shape how this nation understands its past and, in turn, its present. So through executive action, we're seeing attempts to constrain how history is taught, narrow which narratives are deemed legitimate, and elevate a version of patriotic history that's sanitized of conflict, struggle, or structural inequality. It's not just a policy debate that's going on. It is a contest over our national memory. We're living in a time where truth is not merely being debated, it is deliberately being reshaped. And where narratives are constructed not to illuminate history, but to sanitize history. Where discomfort is recast as a danger. And where entire communities are written out of a national story in the name of so-called patriotic history. The executive order itself purports to restore sanity to history by propagating insane fictions and manufactured narratives designed to obscure truth and reshape memory. But in the midst of this, there remains a space where truth is not optional, where assertions have to be supported, testimony given under oath, evidence is tested, and records are created, and that space is litigation. Litigation isn't just about resolving disputes, it's about constructing an official record of what happened and what it meant. Every complaint, motion, deposition, closing argument are not just legal tools, they are narratives that shape history. Here is where litigation does some things that few institutions otherwise can do. They compel truth through testimony. Litigation exposes what power seeks to hide, and it forces disclosure. And it documents harm and preserves a record that can't easily be erased and that outlives the moment. In recent immigration litigation, for example, we see court proceedings that have done more than resolve individual claims. They've documented policies, conditions, and consequences that might otherwise have remained obscured. I am remembering also the documentary that you participated in with Thurgood Marshall, how he went around the country and he documented the condition of schools that Black children were being educated in, and he created a record that separate was not equal. The record remains. Long after the headlines fade and political narratives shift, the record remains, and it becomes a foundation upon which future generations can truly understand what was done and what was endured. And so lawyers have a role in making sure that the enduring narrative of truth is preserved. Now, there are tensions that necessitate some deliberate action on the role of lawyers, so lawyers can't be silent, complicit, or complacent, because there's a value choice for lawyers even to make. The law is not inherently a truth-telling system. It's a system that can reveal truth, but it can also obscure it. So facts don't speak for themselves. Lawyers give them voice. They emphasize facts. They emphasize which stories are centered, which harms are named, and which are minimized. And so the question becomes, what kind of inquisitors will we be? When Barbara Jordan said, "Today I am an inquisitor," she was not just claiming power. She was claiming her duty, and she was reminding us that we have a collective duty in times like this. It's a duty to question, to probe, and to hold power accountable to truth. And that is the role of the litigator at its best, to ask the questions that others may avoid, to force answers under oath, to translate lived experience into legal meaning, and to ensure that the record reflects reality, not mythology. So this duty is grounded in a lawyer's ethical responsibility and an oath to uphold the Constitution. And we have to be honest with ourselves as a profession that the greatest threat to truth in litigation is not always falsehood, it's actually distortion through omission. And it's carefully constructed narratives that are technically accurate, but fundamentally misleading. That is the real danger that lawyers can guard against. And so in a moment like this, where a broader society is already struggling with disinformation, the stakes of distortion are even higher. And lawyers, as inquisitors of truth, cannot allow the facts to be distorted in this season. We determine what's written in our briefs, what we argue in trials, and we choose what to include and what to exclude. And our choice doesn't just affect the outcome of a case, it shapes a historical record, which is why the lawyer must remain an inquisitor of truth. And so in the face of an effort to reframe oppression as progress, to erase struggle, and to flatten the truth, litigation becomes one of the last lines of resistance. Because in the courtroom, narratives have to be supported, claims have to be tested, and truth, in theory, must withstand scrutiny. So I would suggest for those of us in this profession that this is not just a role, it's a calling to stand in the space where what is said and what is true, in the space between what is said and what is true, to ensure that those whose stories are most vulnerable to erasure are fully seen, fully heard, and fully recorded, to be in the truest sense inquisitors of truth. So in her statement, Congresswoman Jordan reflected an understanding of something fundamental, that democracy depends not just on laws, but on people willing to enforce them with integrity, and specifically to interrogate power, to insist on truth, to preserve a record that history can't distort. And so today the question is not simply whether litigation can tell the truth. The question is whether we as litigators will tell the truth. Litigators, it's our responsibility to question power, interrogate narratives, and ensure that the truth is not buried beneath convenience or ideology. Because what we build in the record today will become what the nation remembers tomorrow. And so today, we too are inquisitors.